Ancestor! Sir! Some people shouted excitedly at the sword god sword tomb. It was obvious that these 4 strong men came from 4 different forces. Jason narrowed his eyes. In fact, he had already felt the auras of these 4 people. They were the terrifying forces hidden in the desert city. As soon as the 4 moonlight gods appeared, everyone present was stunned. Those forces that did not have the sword god order but were preparing to plunder at the last moment stopped their actions and hesitated. Originally, they had planned that if they snatched the sword god token at the last moment, they might be able to enter the sword god sword tomb. However, the appearance of the 4 moonlight gods far exceeded their expectations and disrupted their plans. Many forces looked at each other, feeling the terrifying aura exuded by the 4 moonlight gods, and finally gritted their teeth and had no choice but to retreat. In the area near the sword god sword tomb, in an instant, only the 18 forces with the sword god order were left. Everyone, please take out your sword god tokens. The leading old man looked at the crowd and spoke. Everyone looked at each other and took out their own sword god token from their bodies, and Jason did the same. Buzz. 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 As soon as the sword god token came out, a soaring aura rose into the sky from the 18 sword god tokens, constantly flashing and slowly appearing. The sword god sword tomb formed a certain resonance. Everyone, please pay attention, the sword tomb is about to be opened. The old man shouted coldly. Boom. At this moment, a black figure suddenly appeared in the sky and landed in the area of the sword god sword tomb. Who? Who is it? Many shouts resounded, and everyone looked at the black shadow and shouted loudly. This is a figure wearing black tights, with a layer of black mist lingering on his face, only revealing a pair of cold, gloomy eyes. His aura is restrained, and he stands there. Just like a stone, not even a breath of breath escapes. Who is your excellency? You are not allowed to enter the sword god's sword tomb without the sword god's order. Why don't you retreat quickly? Not far away, a star glory god relied on the previous orders of the 4 moon glory gods and shouted coldly. He didn't notice that after seeing this person, the expressions of the golden-robed man, Shura, and the great moonlight gods changed. It's just that he has been careless since he appeared. Bottoms, who was fearless, also pursed his lips. Obviously, he was quite afraid of this person. And Jason's eyes narrowed slightly. From the man in black, he actually felt an extremely cold power. Although this power is hidden, it cannot escape Jason's perception and seems weak. But compared to the aura of the golden-robed man Shura, he didn't give in too much. Shadow Killer Nishizawa, you don't have the sword god order, but you still want to enter the sword god sword tomb. The leading old man among the 4 moonlight gods said coldly. As soon as he said these words, it was like a heavy bomb was dropped in the calm lake, and the entire sword god sword tomb was exploded. What? This person is Shadow Killer Nishizawa? The gold medal killer of the Shadow Killing Alliance. Legend has it that there is no mission he has ever taken on that he cannot complete. More than 20 Yuhui gods have died in his hands. Man. I heard not long ago that he escaped from the hands of a strong sun god. His strength is extraordinary, and even ordinary sun god powerhouses can't do anything to him. Countless voices of discussion. In this area of the mountains suddenly, everyone's expressions changed drastically, as if they had seen a ghost. The Xingyao god who had scolded him before was even more pale and his body was trembling. No sword god order? Shadow Killer Nishizawa looked coldly at the leading old man and disappeared suddenly. Everyone within the sword god sword tomb was shocked. Before they could react, a black stream of light appeared in the void and rushed directly towards the powerful Xingyao god who had scolded him before. Senior. The man cried out in horror, and was about to rise into the sky the moment Shadow Killer Nishizawa disappeared. But even so, it was a step too late. The divine power in the sky was released crazily, but the man's feet could not even leave the ground, and the black stream of light had already appeared in front of him. Pfft! Like a machete hitting a watermelon, the Xingyao god's head shattered in an instant, like a rotten watermelon, and white bone stubble and flesh and blood flew everywhere. A strong man of the Xingyao god level, in the blink of an eye, the soul flew away and disappeared into thin air. The golden sword god originally held by the Xingyao god stayed in midair, and a pair of lifeless black palms stretched out from the void and pulled it into his hands. A black figure appeared faintly, and the shadow killer Nishizawa looked coldly at the 4 moonlight gods not far away. "Don't I have the sword god token now?" A hoarse voice sounded, full of indifference, making everyone's hearts tremble. Many people can do it when the moonlight god kills the powerful starlight god with one strike, but if it is as easy as the Shizuo, effortless, it is like squeezing an ant to death, but not everyone can do it. The expressions of the 4 moonlight gods were a little cold. The rules they had just set were broken in the blink of an eye, which made them feel angry. However, after the 4 of them looked at each other, they were surprisingly not angry. Old Patriarch. As soon as the Xingyao god died, everyone in his former force was filled with grief. They looked at the shadow killer Shiza with anger and fear in their eyes. "Get out of here. When you have the strength, I won't mind you coming for revenge." Caesar's hoarse voice sounded again, like a ghost, erratic. The dozen or so people who belonged to that force gritted their teeth and swallowed it. With tears in their eyes, they exited the sword god sword tomb with the body of the star god, and then rose into the sky and left this place. Even the strongest old patriarch was killed by a few blows. What's the use of them staying here? Jason could feel that there were several forces on the periphery that disappeared quietly as the group of people left. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This is the God realm, a world where the strong are respected and full of killings. The chain of laws and the corpse of a star god are extremely red-eyed to any force. I am afraid that the power of the star god before was more than 10 people. Even if they could return to their family's home, very few of them would die. A subsequent blow from a strong man can lead to the downfall of a powerful family. This is the most vivid manifestation of respect for the strong. Boom. As the light on the sword god token became more and more intense, and after the sword god sword tomb completely emerged, clouds of rainbow light suddenly burst out from the sword god token, covering the sword god in his hand. On everyone who ordered it. There are big and small rainbows. For example, Jason is the only one. The light beam is not big, but like other forces with many people, the light beam is slightly larger. But it could only wrap up 2 or 3 people around the person holding the token. The 18 light rainbows slowly disappeared, and everyone in the light rainbow disappeared. It also completely disappeared outside the sword tomb. Boom. Just when Jason and others disappeared, a powerful aura suddenly came from a distance. This aura was extremely strong. It came from afar. The remaining powerful men from many forces present felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on their hearts. This aura was so heavy that every low-level spiritual god and middle-ranking spirit god present. A strong man at the level of a spiritual god couldn't hold on. He fell heavily to the ground and vomited blood. Even a powerful man at the level of a spiritual god also knelt on one knee and looked pale. This kind of momentum was really terrifying, and they had never felt it before, even from Bottoms, who was the pinnacle figure of the moonlight god. Rumble. A huge roar came from far away, and everyone looked up in horror. In the distant sky, an earthy yellow stream of light was seen passing by like lightning. Wherever it passed, the void rioted, and the power of the earth element in the space was revealed. It's all tumbling. In the earthy yellow light, a figure flew towards the location of the sword god sword tomb like lightning. The momentum is terrifying. Wait a minute. Seeing the people in front of the sword tomb entering the sword tomb following the light rainbow, the figure let out a loud shout. The shout was like thunder, rumbling, and the wind howled. Everyone in front of the sword tomb insisted. Everyone fell down one after another, and the big trees in the mountains burst into flames under the roar. The khaki-flowing shadow disappeared. This was an old man with a withered face, carrying a long knife on his back, with deep eyes, and a terrifying aura flowing on his body, leaving everyone present with no resistance. Damn it, I'm actually late. The old man glanced around, with a trace of anger in his eyes. Boom. He suddenly moved forward, wanting to enter the sword tomb, but the soft light shields outside the sword tomb instantly blocked him from the outside. No matter how hard he tried, he could not rush in. In that case, Chong. The long sword carried on the old man's back suddenly came out of its sheath. The long sword, which was as tall as a person, shook in the void. The light in the old man's eyes skyrocketed. The shadow of an earth-yellow sword that was more than 10 feet high appeared in the void, and a terrifying aura filled the air. Come on, the slightest spatial crack appeared out of thin air at the blade. Open it. A roar like thunder resounded throughout the world. The old man held a long knife and struck hard at the light barrier outside the sword god sword tomb. Boom. Where the long sword was directed, the sky collapsed and the earth shattered. The nearby mountain peaks seemed to be split apart. The huge shadow of the sword slashed down the light shield, and the entire light shield shook violently. Buzz, 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 the light shield shook violently, and suddenly, from the sword tomb, countless sword shadows appeared. As soon as these sword shadows appeared, they merged with each other to form a sword-shaped shadow, a supreme sword-shaped shadow. The sword came and struck hard at the old man. Whoops! The shadow of the sword shot through the air, and the shadow of the giant sword struck directly on the long sword. The long sword suddenly shattered, and the shadow of the sword continued unabated and attacked the old man again. Get out, the old man roared, the long knife in his hand shook repeatedly, and he struck out hundreds of knives in a row. Boom! The roar resounded throughout the world, and the sword shadow exploded loudly, splitting the old man's fallen sword light. After forcing the old man back from the sword tomb, the sword shadow disappeared into the sword tomb again and disappeared. Pfft! In the void, the old man retreated violently, spitting out a mouthful of blood, and his hands holding the long knife were shaking. The ancient sword god is really powerful. I'm just waiting here to see who can take away the sword god's treasure under my hand. The old man snorted coldly, and disappeared into the void with a sway. The old man's figure disappeared, and the pressure on everyone in the entire area where the sword tomb was located disappeared. It's so scary. Who was that person just now? With that kind of momentum and power, it couldn't be the god of Sun Yao. Yes, it's the god of Sun Yao, the kind of power that tears the void with his hands, not the moon. A powerful person at the level of the god of radiance can possess it. A god of radiance. At this moment, everyone present felt a hint of horror in their hearts, and their bodies were trembling involuntarily. In the world of gods, people at the level of gods are considered to be at the upper level. A star god can serve as the city lord of an ordinary city, while a strong person at the level of moon god is usually a major force in dozens of nearby cities. Among the big guys, as for the sun glory god, he is a truly top-notch figure. No matter where he goes, he is a big shot, a giant-like existence. In the entire wild ancient land, the number of sun glory gods will not be too many, and will not exceed thousands. Tens of thousands may sound like a lot, but you must know that the heavenly god realm is vast, with an area of countless billions of miles, and a population so large that it is impossible to count. A single wild ancient land has tens of billions of people, and among them, the Sun Yao god, but there are only less than 10,000, which can be said to be rare. This old man obviously also came for the sword god sword tomb. If this is the case, then my lords and the others are in danger. Only a few people entered the sword god sword tomb, and most of the forces had strong men staying at the sword tomb. Besides, seeing the terrifying strength of the old man before, I couldn't help but feel worried. However, the ancient wilderness is vast. Even if they ask for help from the headquarters now, the headquarters will not be able to send experts in time. Therefore, they can only pray secretly in their hearts. Buzz. While countless people outside were trembling in fear, Jason and the others who entered the sword tomb were completely unaware of what was happening in the outside world. In the rainbow, Jason felt a powerful force envelope him. When he reacted, he had already appeared on an empty flat land. This is an extremely wide flat land. Nearly 50 strong men who entered the sword tomb all appeared here together. What was in front of everyone was a long passage, dark and deep, and it was unknown where it led. However, everyone can feel that from the depths of this dark passage, there is a faint pressure coming from the depths. This pressure is sharp, like a cold light pressing into the body, making people feel chilled. Obviously, there is the true inheritance of the sword god. Boom. 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 On the ground, everyone looked at each other, and immediately their bodies swayed and they rushed towards the passage. A sharp sound of breaking the suffocation sounded. The first ones to rush into the passage were naturally the powerful moonlight gods led by Shura, Bottoms, Nishizawa, etc., followed by many powerhouses at the level of starlight gods. As for the last one, and even some powerful men at the level of spiritual gods. Jason hid in the crowd and flew forward unhurriedly. The sword god sword tomb is the burial place of the ancient sword gods. Jason can feel the mysterious power located in the deepest part of the sword tomb. Such a place will definitely be full of crises. If you are at the forefront, there may not be anything. Benefit. Boom. Just when Jason was thinking this, suddenly there was a huge roar in front of him, and a strong sword intent was transmitted from the depths of the passage. At the same time, the low roars of Shura and others were also heard. Everyone flew forward, the passage gradually disappeared, and a stone chamber appeared in front of everyone. In front of the stone chamber, there were flashes of spiritual light. All around the stone chamber, there were some strange lines engraved on it, shining with brilliant light. Array? Jason's gaze swept across the entire stone chamber, and he couldn't help but feel a hint of surprise in his heart. The many patterns on this stone tennis table seemed simple, but in fact it was an extremely complex formation. With Jason's attainment in formations, he could immediately tell that this formation turned out to be a 4th grade formation. Boom. 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 In the stone chamber, the sky was filled with brilliance, and a hazy spiritual energy enveloped everything. From the array diagram in the center of the stone chamber, waves of terrifying sword intent came out. There were even hazy voices flashing in the light. Although the appearance could not be seen clearly, judging from the angry shouts coming from them, it was obviously Shura and others who were the first to rush towards the passage. It seemed that trapped in it, there must be treasures in this stone chamber. Someone in the crowd said in surprise. As his words fell, figures suddenly rushed into it like swifts flying past, turning into afterimages. Jason didn't hesitate and walked out directly. Buzz. Endless brilliance enveloped him in an instant, and Jason suddenly felt an astonishing sword intent appear all around him. He looked around and saw a white scene in front of him. There was no road, and there were swords floating all around. The subtle sword shadow conveyed bursts of terrifying aura from this sword shadow. This is obviously a trapping formation. If a person enters it, it will be fine if he does not move. If he goes wrong, he will trigger crazy attacks from the surrounding sword shadows. Although this formation is only a 4th level formation, these sword shadows are it was constantly exuding a terrifying aura. It was obvious that with Jason's strength, it would be difficult to please him if he was entangled. A confident smile appeared on Jason's lips, and his powerful spiritual consciousness was released in an instant, analyzing the composition of this formation. Subtle lines and roots emerged in Jason's mind, and a large amount of data washed away like a flood. A faint smile suddenly appeared on Jason's lips. Pa. He stepped forward with ease and walked towards the sword shadow in front of him. A magical scene happened. The shadows of dozens of empty swords floating in front of him actually gave way automatically at this moment, revealing a narrow passage. Jason moved forward step by step, each foot landing with incomparable precision. It seemed random, but in fact it was extremely cleverly calculated. Spiritual patterns rippled from his feet. Wherever he passed, there were all empty sword shadows in front of him. They were all like emperors welcoming them, automatically stepping aside and forming a straight line. Buzz. After walking about 100 steps, Jason finally came to the end of the formation. What appeared in front of him was a stone chamber. In the stone chamber, piles of purple gleaming crystals were neatly placed. Dazzling light. God crystal. Jason looked startled, then showed a hint of surprise. This divine crystal is the currency of the heavenly god realm. In the heavenly god realm, everything is purchased with divine stones. The purchasing power of divine stones is quite strong. For example, the law divine chain of an ordinary low-level spiritual god is worth about 100 divine stones, and the median the spirit gods is more expensive, worth about 10,000 god stones. The upper spirits gods is worth 1 million god stones, the Xingyao gods is worth 10 million god stones, and the moon glory gods is worth 100 million god stones. Of course, these are just market prices, and some things are often priceless. As for the divine crystal, its value is even higher than that of the divine stone. 100 divine stones can only be exchanged for one divine crystal. In other words, one divine crystal is equivalent to the law divine chain of a lower spiritual god. Now, this stone chamber is densely filled with dazzling divine crystals, worth tens of millions at least, and their value is astonishing. Boom. 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 Listening to the sounds of the people behind struggling to break the formation, Jason waved his hand. Crash. The purple divine crystals in the sky suddenly turned into a long river, pouring into the God of War tower between Jason's eyebrows. In an instant, all the divine crystals in the stone chamber were absorbed completely. Fortunately, the space of the God of War tower is extremely huge, so it can accommodate the divine crystal in this stone chamber. After all the divine crystals entered the storage space of the God of War tower, Jason immediately calculated the number of these divine crystals, which turned out to be a full 80 million. When converted into divine stones, it was even more amazing. There are so many divine crystals. Even if you don't find the top-grade magical medicine here, you can go to some big places to auction it after you go out. Jason thought secretly in his heart. The sky full of divine crystals disappeared, and a dark passage suddenly appeared in front of Jason. Obviously, this passage was the exit of the stone chamber, but it was blocked by the divine crystals before. Jason swayed and was about to enter the passage, but suddenly he seemed to have thought of something, and with a thought, he retreated to the formation. The moment Jason had just returned to the formation, break it. A thunderous roar sounded, and the divine power of the fire element rippled out. It was the roar of bottoms. Boom. 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 While bottoms shouted, there were also low roars, and terrifying forces erupted in the formation. Turning around, it was obvious that Shura and the others were launching a fierce attack. After being attacked by so many people, this fourth-grade formation finally couldn't hold on, and kept shaking, making a rumbling roar, and then dissipated. The formation was broken, and the sword intent contained in the formation quickly they gathered together to form a small golden sword shadow, which shook slightly and then disappeared. In the stone chamber, the figures of everyone suddenly appeared. Everyone present was in an extremely embarrassed state after the formation disappeared. There were originally a team of nearly 50 people, but now only about 40 were left. On the ground of the stone room, there were still shocking pools of blood. Obviously someone died in this formation before. Who? 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 As soon as the formation disappeared, Shura and the others turned into streams of light one by one, as if competing for speed, and arrived at the end of the stone room like lightning. What, this stone chamber is empty? Why is there nothing? Seeing the bare floor of the stone chamber, everyone had expressions of disbelief on their faces. They had worked hard to break through the formation in order to find the treasures in the stone chamber, but they did not expect that there was nothing in the stone chamber, which made them so depressed that they almost vomited blood. This stone chamber can't be empty. How could there be no treasures? On the Linghuang pavilion side, Master Feiluan suddenly turned his head and his eyes fell on Jason. Your position was closest to this place before. I wonder if you took away the treasure. Shua. For a moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Jason. Who are you? You dare to talk to me like this, you are seeking death. Jason raised his eyebrows, and a strong evil aura surged out of his body. Chong. The black épée behind Jason suddenly unsheathed and fell into Jason's hand. He swept forward violently, and the black épée turned into a black angry dragon and rushed directly towards the opponent. Boom! Endless divine power exploded. The entire stone room seemed to be whipped up by violent winds and waves at this moment. Some of the weak star gods around them retreated in horror, and Master Feiluan's face turned pale in an instant. Lord Shura, save me! He shouted in panic. Humph! Shura snorted coldly, and golden sword intent surged out from his body. The golden long sword was unsheathed and directly blocked the black heavy sword struck by Jason. Boom! The terrifying divine power swept across like a gunpowder explosion. When the attack came, Master Feiluan, despite being protected by Shura, was still thrown heavily by this force, with blood spurting out from his mouth. What an idiot! The position where the boy was standing before was clearly still in the formation. In addition, if he really took the treasure, I'm afraid he would not be here long ago and would run in front of us. Bottom's sneer voice came from not far away. He turned around and rushed directly into the passage at the end of the stone chamber. Let's go! The four moonlight gods also looked at each other and rushed into the passage. As for the shadow killer Shiza, he had already disappeared into the void. Jason looked at Shura and the others coldly, then turned and entered the passage. His eyes were cold. Master Feiluan couldn't help but shiver all over. In front of everyone, Jason still needs to hold back and not use his full strength. Once there is a chance, then, Jason sneered in his heart. Let's go. Shura glanced coldly at Fei Run beside him and rushed into the passage. Then, the remaining star gods did not stop and continued to fly forward. In the long passage, a group of people moved forward quickly. Also, I don't know how long they flew, but when the passage reached the end, everyone suddenly felt their eyes light up, and a vast world appeared in front of everyone. This was a majestic place, and tall sword mountains appeared as far as the eye could see. In front of everyone, these sword mountains are large and small, high and low. The low ones are only a few feet, but the high ones are as high as tens of thousands of feet. There is a feeling of boldness like thousands of mountains. There are mountains and fields everywhere, handles. There are swords with hilts, including iron swords, wooden swords, gold swords, copper swords, divine swords, tungsten swords, as well as swords made of many strange materials such as meteorites, Joyo divine stones, hell stones, and thunder crystals. The world. Swords of various shapes were inserted into the ground, and they were crowded together to form a vast world of swords, a civilization of swords. Waves of sword energy soared into the sky, and infinite sword intent dispersed in the void. Everyone present, many strong men have swords on them, but in such an environment and atmosphere, their long swords are shaking. They feel like they want to blend into the world, transform into nature, and die in sacrifice. Chong! 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 Some strong men couldn't suppress the excitement of the swords on their bodies. These long swords, which had been with them for countless years and were almost integrated with themselves, soared into the sky and submerged into the endless mountain of swords. We completely lost contact and could never be found again. What's going on? The faces of these strong men were ashen. The original intention of coming to the Sword God Sword Tomb was to look for treasures, but they didn't expect that the treasures were not found. The artifacts they had nurtured for countless years were gone. They were all on the verge of crying. Even the golden sword on Shura's body also made waves of dragon roars and shook constantly. "Huh, give it to me!" Shura shouted coldly, patted the long sword on his waist, and an invisible force entered it. The golden long sword stopped shaking and returned to calm. However, the black heavy sword behind Jason did not move at all. Instead, Jason could feel that there was something at the end of the endless sword mountain that was attracting the heavy sword behind him. "Let's go!" I don't know who shouted, and figures rose into the sky and walked through the sword mountain. Suddenly, someone saw green grass-like plants in the sword mountain. These grass-like plants grow in this sword mountain. Each one is sword-shaped and exudes a unique sword-like atmosphere. "It's sword grass!" the man exclaimed, his body suddenly downwards, and he took the grass-like plant into his hands. The sword-shaped sword grass exuded a strong sword energy. This was a 9th level holy sword grass, although it was only a 9th level sword grass, but the sword intention contained in it is of certain help to the god level powerhouses. However, this level of sword grass still cannot attract the attention of the god level powerhouses, except for the few remaining high level spiritual gods. The observers were pleasantly surprised. Most of them did not even stop and flew forward. As everyone continued to fly, the sword intent in the void became stronger and stronger, and the swords that appeared between the mountains. There are also more and more sword grasses. It's sword grass at the level of low-grade magic medicine. Suddenly, someone saw 7 or 8 sword grasses in the mountains. Each of these sword grasses was several feet high. Astonishing sword energy burst out from them. From a distance, one could feel the terrifying power contained in them. Power. Sword grass at the level of low-grade magic medicine already has a very astonishing value. If it is put up for auction, each plant can fetch a price of hundreds of thousands to millions of sacred stones. Even a powerful sword grass at the level of Xingyao Tianshan. Even if you don't, you should also be tempted by this. Whoosh! 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 Suddenly, almost 20 or 30 strong men in the crowd rushed towards the 7 or 8 sword grasses. "Get away! This sword grass is mine. Get out of my way, or you'll die." Yao Xiao was outnumbered, and in the sky above those sword grasses, a huge conflict suddenly broke out among 20 or 30 Xingyao god-level powerhouses. However, before any of them could pick any sword grass. Boom! A terrifying aura came, and the golden sword energy spread like a wave, directly covering the 7 or 8 sword grasses and picking them up. 7 or 8 sword grasses exuding soaring sword energy flew into the sky in the golden sword energy, and were pocketed by someone, none other than the Shura of Linghuang Pavilion. Who stole the sword grass? Many people were furious, but when they turned around and saw who it was, all of them remained silent. Although there are 20 or 30 of them, with the power of Shura, even these people may not be their opponents. Damn it! They could only say with hatred in their hearts and left helplessly. After such an incident, many powerful people at the star god level finally discovered it. They all gathered together, and even if they discovered the treasure, it would not be their turn at all. In an instant, these people all turned into streams of light and scattered among the mountains. Only in this way could they have a slight chance. As for Jason, he didn't pay attention to this scene at all, but kept flying forward. Although the low-grade magic medicine level sword grass is precious, it is not what Jason needs at all. The only thing he wants is the high-grade magic medicine level sword grass. Following the attraction conveyed by the black heavy sword behind him, Jason continued to fly towards the depths of the sword tomb. Boom! Suddenly, a strong sword intent rushed up from the mountains in the distance, and at the same time a scent of medicine spread. Jason's eyes suddenly focused and flew there. A green long sword with a height of more than 10 feet stood there. The terrifying sword intent rose into the sky, forming waves of air in the void, almost breaking through the void. This is a mid-grade magical medicine level sword grass. Although the green sword looked no different from a sword, Jason could see that it was just a sword grass. Huh. Jason flew away immediately. Just when Jason was about to arrive in front of the sword grass. Whoosh! A strong man suddenly flew out from the mountain kernel. When the strong man saw the sword grass in the valley, his face showed a hint of joy, but before he was ready to take action, seeing Jason flying over from a short distance away, his cold eyes had already fallen on him. Senior, I am blind and ignorant. I didn't know that this sword grass belongs to Senior. Please show mercy, Senior. The man was so frightened that he almost chopped off his outstretched hand. His whole body was trembling, and his face was full of panic. He said hastily. After saying this, he turned around and flew back to the place where he flew out before. Jason, who was originally ready to take action, couldn't help but smile dumbly when he saw this scene, and raised his hand to grab the green sword-shaped sword grass. Buzz! Sensing the approaching crisis, the mid-grade magic medicine sword grass moved slightly, and immediately turned into a stream of blue light rising into the sky, trying to escape from here. The middle-grade magic medicine already has a certain amount of life, and can automatically escape when faced with danger, but how could Jason give it this chance? His outstretched hand rose up in the wind, covering the sky and the sun. Buzz buzz, the sword-shaped sword grass kept vibrating, and endless sword intent, sword light, and sword energy surged out from it. Thousands of blue long swords suddenly appeared between the heaven and the earth, making a clanging sound across the sky and the earth, trying to break through Jason's capture, but no matter how hard it tried, Jason's big hand was like a mountain falling from the sky, unmoving, grabbing the sword grass and sealing the energy in it. After the sword-shaped sword grass, which was more than 10 feet high, was sealed with energy, it immediately shrank in size, and finally turned into a small green sword as big as a little finger, which was taken into the God of War tower by Jason. Jason's figure did not pause, cut through the void, and continued to fly towards the depths of the sword tomb. The strong man from the star god who had rescued Jason's life looked at this scene. Instead of feeling any envy in his heart, he felt a sense of luck about escaping from death. He then turned around and headed towards Jason. It flew to the other side in a different direction and disappeared into the void in an instant. A battle for sword grass started in the sword mountain of the sword tomb. The more than 40 strong men who entered the sword tomb all made crazy moves and plundered the sword mountain. Whoosh! Jason flew quickly through the secret realm. In his perception, the feeling of summons coming from the depths of the sword mountain became stronger and stronger. During this process, Jason also encountered the sword grass that was a medium-grade magic medicine again, and he took it into his pocket. I don't know how far it flew forward. Boom! 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 Suddenly, from the distant mountains, streams of strong sword intent soared into the sky, and the terrifying power penetrated directly into the void. Above, the 7 rays of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple representing the rainbow light appeared on the horizon and turned into a bright rainbow, spreading across the sky. This power was extremely strong, and he felt it from afar, and there was a tremor in Jason's heart. At the same time, the attraction that Jason felt also came from somewhere. What is that? Jason was startled, and suddenly the speed of his slow flight suddenly increased, and he flew forward at extremely high speed. Gradually, the mountains were left behind by Jason, and Jason finally saw clearly where the 7 rainbow lights were. In the center of the mountains in front of him, a clear lake appeared in front of him. The lake was rippling with blue waves, and streams of sword intent flowed, revealing the compelling chi. This lake. It was actually formed by the pure sword intention. Sword intent, this is the lake of sword intent. Even though Jason was well informed, he couldn't help but let out a low shout in shock. The lake of sword intent. Jason once saw in the many remaining classics of God King Stern that when a strong swordsman reaches the ultimate understanding of swordsmanship, he can directly materialize the sword intention and become a liquid-like existence. This kind of the sword intent contained in every drop of the water of sword intent is equivalent to the total sword intent understood by an ordinary sword master of the moonlight god. The sword intent of such a large lake may not be able to be filled even if all the god-level experts from the entire ancient wilderness were gathered together. It's incredible, it's incredible. What kind of person is this ancient sword god? There is such a lake of sword intention in his sword tomb. This Jason was shocked and didn't even know. What should I say? Before entering the sword god's sword tomb, he also inquired about the identity of the ancient sword god. It's just because this ancient sword god is too old. Nothing was found at all, but it was said that he was a top-notch figure among the sun gods, but now I have a look. Not at all. For a strong person who can possess such a lake of sword intent, the average strong person at the level of the Sun Yao god may not be his enemy with one move, even those who are at the peak of the Sun Yao god. There is no threat to him at all. I am afraid that only invincible figures among the sun gods such as the 5 great generals under God King Stern and the god of killing Brat can possibly rival him. But these are just Jason's simple guesses based on the lake of sword intent. Jason even has a possibility in his mind that he can't even imagine. That is, maybe a figure like Brat, the serial killer god, who is invincible among the sun gods. They may not be the opponents of this ancient sword god. After all, this lake of sword intent is so shocking that it is not even possible for a strong person at the level of sunlight god to do it. At this moment, Jason could only be happy in his heart. That was because the great desert city was located in a remote area, and the news of the sword god's order had not spread far, and no one knew the identity of the ancient sword god. This led to the fact that there were not many if the strong men come, if they know that there is such a large lake of sword intention in the sword god's sword tomb. I am afraid that the strong men in the entire heavenly god realm will be boiling, and countless sunlight god-level strong men will swarm over. Whoosh! 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 And when Jason was extremely surprised, in the distance a sound of breaking through the air came, and figures exuding a terrifying aura also appeared in front of the sword. Next to the lake of intention, there were several powerful men at the level of the moonlight god who had entered the sword god's sword tomb. At this moment, Shura, Bottoms, and the 4 moonlight gods who appeared later were all standing blankly in the void, looking in front of them in surprise, and even Jason on the side ignored them. The lake of sword intent is actually the lake of sword intent. Impossible. Who is this ancient sword god? How could he have such a large lake of sword intent? Shocking voices echoed in the lake of sword intent. Rang out, and everyone was stunned. It's unbelievable. If I can get this lake of sword intention and completely absorb the sword intent in this lake, then Shura from Linghuang Pavilion trembled all over and murmured, almost going crazy with excitement. Although he is very powerful, with his Yuhui god-level strength, even if he releases all his sword intent, the final sword intent that can be formed will only be 2 or 3 drops at most. But what appears in front of him but it is a whole lake of sword intent. Once he absorbs it, he will be able to run rampant throughout the ancient wilderness and even the world of gods. Huh. While muttering to himself, Shura's eyes suddenly became extremely crazy, and his whole person suddenly turned into a golden stream of light, rushing towards the lake of sword intent. Behind him, among the 4 powerful moonlight gods, a gray-haired old man and a white-haired old woman couldn't bear it anymore and rushed forward at high speed. The remaining Jason, Bottoms, another white-haired old man and a middle-aged man with short brown hair held back their posture and did not move. Such a terrifying lake of sword intent appeared here alive, and it was definitely not something that could be obtained casually. Sure enough, before the Shura trio came to the lake of sword intent, a transparent barrier suddenly appeared, blocking them. In front of the 3 of them, at the same time in the lake of sword intent, a colorful and rich sword energy suddenly rose into the sky. The terrifying sword energy instantly tore through the void and came in front of the 3 Shura people. No. Sensing the terrifying power of the 7-colored sword energy, the three Shura men let out a roar of fright and anger, and quickly retreated, using all their strength. Boom! A huge roar resounded throughout the world, and the three Shura people were thrown away by the sword energy, with blood overflowing from their mouths. At the same time, the originally calm lake of sword intent suddenly surged. That is, in everyone's shocked eyes, the lake of sword intent surged, and 7 bright long swords slowly rose from the lake of sword intent in the direction of the 7 stars. Each of these 7 long swords it is radiant, divided into 7 different colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and dazzling. And when the sword intention lake was surging, everyone saw that there seemed to be something at the bottom of the sword intent lake. The magic medicine is definitely the scent of a top-grade magic medicine. There is a top-grade magic medicine at the bottom of the lake of sword intent. Jason even smelled a refreshing scent of medicine in the air, gushing out from the bottom of the lake and then gradually dissipating. His heart suddenly became excited. What should I do? How should I enter the lake of sword intent? He was a little anxious at the same time. The reckless behavior of Shura and others had told everyone that outsiders were not allowed to approach the lake of sword intent. Once they got close, they would under its terrible attack. Jason's eyes fell on the 7 swords rising in front of him. In the void, the 7 color long swords were suspended in mid-air, exuding terrifying energy. What's going on with these 7 long swords? A trace of doubt arose in Jason's mind. If these 7 long swords were said to protect the lake of sword intent, Jason didn't feel it from these 7 long swords. Instead of seeing any murderous intent, Jason faintly felt that there seemed to be some kind of connection between these 7 long swords and the lake of sword intent. This connection was extremely unique, just like the relationship between a key and a treasure chest. Key? Are these 7 long swords the key to entering the lake of sword intent? As soon as this thought came out, a flash of light suddenly flashed in Jason's heart, and a brilliant light burst out from his eyes, and his whole body flew suddenly, go forward and grab one of the long swords. The moment Jason took action, Shura, Bottoms, and others seemed to have thought of this. Almost at the same time, 7 figures flew out like lightning and grabbed one of the long swords. What Jason ingested was one of the purple long swords. This purple long sword was extremely slender, sharp, with purple energy rising to the sky. It was like a human emperor, full of the aura of a king. However, the reason why Jason grabbed this long sword was not because of its royal aura. After all, the other 6 long swords also had their own merits and extraordinary momentum. It was because Jason, as the god of medicine, had learned from this long sword. On the sword, I felt a trace of aura. Suddenly, just when Jason was about to catch the purple sword, a sense of crisis suddenly emerged in his heart. Jason suddenly turned around, and the 5 elements of spiritual power in his body were operating to the extreme at this moment, and his eyes were fierce. A ball of light burst out from the ground. An aura like a god-king reigning over the 9 heavens surged out from Jason's body crazily. At this moment, Jason seemed to have turned into a demon god, holding a black heavy sword with majestic momentum. In the void, there was a faint flash of black light. It was obvious that someone was hiding. Jason only waited for the other party to take action before launching the most furious thunderstrike. Seeing that the lake of sword intention contained the aura of top-grade magic medicine, Jason would never allow anyone to destroy him. He seemed to feel the terrifying energy in Jason's body. Before he could strike with his sword, the sense of crisis suddenly dissipated from Jason's heart and stayed away from him. Jason grabbed the purple sword not far from him. Although the purple sword had extraordinary momentum, it did not resist Jason's grasp and immediately fell into his hands. In the distance, several other people also got a long sword of their own, but just when the gray-haired old man among the 4 moonlight gods was about to grab the green long sword that belonged to him. Poof! The void beside him suddenly tore open at the last moment, and a black shadow suddenly jumped out of the void. The weapon in his hand seemed to turn into a black lightning and struck directly at his head. This figure is none other than the shadow killer Nishizawa, who has been hiding in the void and has never appeared. Hey! The black dagger was like a bolt of lightning, arriving in front of the gray-haired old man in the blink of an eye. Shiza, the gray-haired old man no longer cared about picking up the green long sword. He shouted angrily and suddenly took out the long sword in his hand, blocking it in front of him. At the same time, he quickly retreated. But Caesar's attack was too fast, so fast that people almost had no time to react. The black dagger passed directly through half of the gray-haired old man's body like a phantom. Pfft! Blood spattered, minced meat flew, and white bone stubble was thrown into the sky. The gray-haired old man roared, and half of his body exploded under Caesar's blow, turning into a rain of blood. Roar! The gray-haired old man roared, his eyes were red, and his body suddenly grew larger, turning into a huge snake body dozens of feet long. The snake body was stained with blood, scarred, cold. The red eyes were full of murderous intent, and he opened his huge mouth towards Shiza. Chi-chi! A black air wave spurted out from the mouth of the big snake like lightning, surging towards Shiza. Wherever the black air wave passed, the void actually made a shishi sound, and was corroded into tiny lines. The space cracked, and at the same time, the huge snake's tail also blasted towards Shiza like lightning. The gray-haired old man's true form was actually a mythical beast, a dragon snake. When faced with a crisis, he instantly launched his most powerful attack. Tisk! The black air wave surged over Caesar's body and covered Caesar's black figure. It collapsed directly and turned into nothingness. What? Everyone was stunned. They couldn't believe that the mighty Shadow Killer Alliance's ace Shadow Killer Shiza could fall like this, but before they could react, a black figure suddenly appeared in the gray. The head of a giant snake transformed by an old man. A stream of black light was like lightning, striking hard at the head of the gray-haired old man. Like a white rainbow penetrating the sun and an eagle striking the long hall, the stream of light containing Shiza's full blow suddenly penetrated his head and the frightened dark red eyes of the giant snake. Pfft! The huge head of the big snake burst open, red blood and brains splashed everywhere, and the endless divine power collapsed. The dagger in Nishizawa's hand struck hard on the law chain on the snake's head, instantly shattering the soul inside. The body that was corroded by the black air flow before was just a prosthesis of Caesar's, and he killed the gray-haired old man with one blow. Nishizawa swayed and took the green sword into his hand. The huge snake body of the gray-haired old man suddenly lost control and fell towards the lake of sword intent below. Boom! When the huge snake body fell to the protective position above the lake of sword intent, the entire lake of sword intent boiled instantly, and thousands of sword lights burst out from it. The terrifying sword intent overwhelmed the sky and instantly shattered the gray-haired old man's huge body, which was dozens of feet long, into nothingness. In just a moment, the gray-haired old man, one of the 8 Yuhuishan gods, died in Shiza's hands. Everyone present was shocked. Caesar, you actually killed Jia Pabo, the white-haired old man in the lead became furious. When he was fighting with the gray-haired old man in Nishizawa, he wanted to step forward to stop them. But the confrontation between the two was too fast. Before he could take action, the gray-haired old man was already dead. Boom! Powerful murderous intent surged above the lake of sword intent. The remaining 3 of the 4 moonlight gods took a step forward, looking at Shiza with anger on their faces, as if they were about to take action at any time. Kill. Before entering the sword god sword tomb, the 4 of them had already concluded an offensive and defensive alliance treaty. Now that the gray-haired old man was killed, they naturally had to take action. Caesar looked coldly at the 3 people not far away, his body switching between reality and reality, exuding a cold aura. Ian, Alexis, do you want to avenge Jia Pabo? Although it's okay to take action, I doubt whether you have the strength, and do you think it's worth it to take action against me for a dead person who is worthless? Damn it. The white-haired old man Ian said angrily. 3 times. The man hesitated for a moment, but finally did not make a move. Indeed, as Nishizawa said, the alliance between the four of them is just a very simple alliance, and they do not have much affection for each other. If they meet any treasures by then, they may even fight each other for the sake of someone who has already. It is indeed not a wise choice to take action against Caesar who died. Looking at this scene, Nishizawa smiled coldly. He had already expected this scene when he chose the gray-haired old man to attack. In terms of personal strength, these four Yuhui gods were the weakest. Of course, the four of them were powerful together, but each other the alliance between them is not strong, and it is easiest to break them individually. Thinking of this, Caesar's eyes couldn't help but fall on Jason beside him. No one knew that before. The first target he set was Jason, but Jason's sudden and terrifying aura made him change. Having made up his mind, he turned to the gray-haired old man who had been injured in the previous attack by Sword in Tent Lake. Feeling Caesar's gaze, Jason's expression was indifferent, without a trace of expression. After learning that there might be a high-grade magic medicine at the bottom of the Sword in Tent Lake, it would be better if others didn't mess with him. If they messed with him, even if it meant exposing his strength, Jason, he will definitely kill him without mercy. Boom. After everyone got the 7 long swords, a monster sword in tent suddenly rose from the bottom of the lake of sword in tent, and at the same time, a loud voice suddenly sounded in their ears. I am the sword god Jiuetian. Those who obtain my 7 divine swords will be tested by my sword god Jiuetian. They enter the lake of sword in tent and penetrate the obstruction of the sword in tent. Those who succeed will obtain my sword god Jiuetian. The inheritance. A rumbling sound rang in the ears of Jason and the others. Immediately, a huge roar sounded. From the bottom of the sword in tent lake, 7 divine rainbows suddenly appeared, covering Jason and the others. Shrouded in. Immediately, Jason felt that his soul had a connection with the lake of sword in tent. Whoosh! In the sky, 7 people landed at the lake of sword in tent at the same time. The protective shield over the lake of sword in tent already existed, but this time, they did not attack Jason and others who entered it. Pft! 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 Sounds like water rang out one after another, and Jason and others plunged into the lake of sword in tent. Boom! The moment Jason entered the lake of sword in tent, a huge sword in tent had already descended into his mind and bombarded his soul. Boom! The monster sword in tent struck, and Jason's sea of soul surged instantly, threatening to collapse at any time. The terrifying sword in tent, like a tide, instantly poured into Jason's mind. Buzz! Jason suddenly felt the sea of his soul surge up, and his whole soul almost felt like it wanted to collapse. The vast sword in tent came, oppressing Jason's soul until it almost froze. This sword in tent, there was a hint of surprise on Jason's face. The sea of souls in his mind surged instantly, with terrifying waves surging. His understanding of the sword made Jason unique in his heart. This kind of sword intent collided fiercely with this sword intent. Boom! 2 invisible forces collided, instantly creating a storm in Jason's mind. Sword intent is not a true talent, but an understanding of the Great Way. It is a swordsman's understanding of the sword, heaven and earth, and everything in the world. Although the oppression from sword intent is not like divine power, it can be obtained from the general crushed people, and when it came, it was silent and invisible, but its level of danger was no less than that of a real battle. With the arrival of terrifying power and such terrifying sword intent, if an ordinary Xingyao god were to come, it is very likely that the soul would be wiped out in an instant, and the soul would fly away in an instant and become a cold corpse. However, Jason relied on his powerful strength, blocked this attack. At this moment, whirlwinds of artistic conception were constantly sweeping through Jason's mind, impacting crazily over his soul, while Jason continued to resist under this terrifying sword intent. What should I do? Jason frantically resisted the sword intent attack, and at the same time looked into the depths of the sword intent lake. At the end of Jason's sight, there were waves of sword intent storms that were constantly surging. In the deepest part of the lake, there seems to be a transparent light shining out. It is hazy and cannot be seen clearly, but there is indeed something there, which makes people's hearts tremble. This sword intent is so terrifying, how can it get into the depths? Jason tried his best to resist, while thinking with all his heart. Although he can still persist now, he has only just entered the lake of sword intent, and the sword intent will obviously become stronger as he continues to deepen. I am afraid that if it drops further, he will not be able to bear it. Jason had no clue. After all, this lake of sword intent is really terrifying. Let alone him, even a figure at the peak of sunlight god may not be able to enter the deepest part of this lake of sword intent. Haha, sword intent, I have it too, open it for me. At this moment, Jason suddenly heard a huge roar in the distance, and immediately he saw Shura, who was some distance away from him, covered in golden light. Shining, a golden transparent giant sword formed in front of him, constantly slashing forward, splitting a path in the lake of sword intent, and the whole person rushed downwards. Boom! 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 A roaring sound sounded. Shura wreaked havoc in the lake of sword intent, using his own sword intent factory to split open the sword intent in the lake of sword intent, trying to go to the deepest level. At the same time, Jason also saw that the other 5 powerful moonlight ginseng gods who entered the lake of sword intent with him, Bottoms, Caesar, and Ian, also used Huduan one after another. Dive quickly into the lake of intention, unwilling to fall behind others. Using sword intent to fight sword intent? Jason murmured, and at the same time an invisible sword intent shot out from his eyes. Boom! The water of the sword intention lake that Jason was in contact with was instantly separated into a channel nearly 1 meter long, and Jason's body dived down. Boom! 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 Jason continued to use his sword intention, turning it into a sharp weapon with his understanding of the sword, and dived in the lake of sword intention. In the blink of an eye, he had dropped nearly 10 meters. However, as the depth of Jason's dive increased, the lake water that his sword intent could split became less and less, and the pressure from around the lake of sword intent became stronger and stronger. Finally, Jason couldn't resist it alone, and suddenly a sword intention from the lake of sword intent suddenly rushed into his mind. Boom! The invisible sword intent penetrated into Jason's soul. Buzz is not to let us resist the sword intention and see who can reach the bottom of the lake first, but Jason's eyes flashed for a moment, and then the whole people rose into the sky and rushed toward the lake. This kid Jason's actions immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the lake. Seeing Jason rushing towards the lake, a sneer appeared on Shura's lips. This kid is too cowardly. He's just scared like this after one person died. It seems that he wants to give up the inheritance of this ancient sword god. Shura sneered, then stopped paying attention to Jason and continued to use his sword. Intention, hone one's strength by constantly resisting the sword's intention, striving to continuously decline. A trace of doubt flashed across the faces of Bottoms and others, but they quickly stopped paying attention to Jason and continued to resist and move forward. On the surface of the lake of sword intent, Jason quickly arrived at the place where he had just entered the water. He stretched his body, stopped the operation of the 5-element spirit beads in his body, and completely opened his body. Boom! Without the protection of the 5-element spiritual pearl and his own artistic conception, the terrifying sword intent instantly poured into Jason's body, but he gritted his teeth and stopped resisting. This ancient sword god wants us to feel his sword intention, understand his sword intention, and accept his inheritance, instead of trying to imitate. Jason roared in his heart, and the terrifying sword intention moved back and forth in his body. A surge of pain, an almost unbearable pain, instantly spread throughout his body. Boom! The pressure of the sword god from ancient times was like a high mountain, pressing on Jason's soul. The sea of souls in Jason's mind boiled instantly, and a terrifying artistic conception oppressed Jason's body, as if thousands of needles were stabbing him. A general huge pain spread to his whole body in an instant. Ah! It hurts. Jason couldn't help but let out a roar of pain. He clenched his teeth and his body couldn't help but tremble. The pain caused by this sword intention made Jason feel as if his whole body was being scalded in boiling water. It also felt like needles were piercing Jason's skin from all angles, penetrating from the skin into the muscles, and the muscles penetrated internal organs. From the internal organs to the bone marrow, there was unparalleled pain everywhere. Colic, life and death colic. It hurts, I can't stand it anymore. But I still have to endure it. For Lan Yu Gusen, I must obtain the inheritance of this sword god and get the top-grade magic medicine. Moreover, although this sword's intention is strong, it cannot kill my soul. This pain is only caused by the effect of the sword on the soul. It is the pain from the deepest part of the soul. I must endure it. This is also a rare practice for me. Jason was really in pain at this moment, almost it was unbearable. The tearing feeling from the deepest part of his soul made his perception confused. There was only one concept in his consciousness, and that was pain. He had never imagined that there was such pain in the world. A person is boiled alive in boiling water, pricked by thousands of needles, and twisted by thousands of knives. What kind of pain is this? Closing his eyes, Jason curled up in pain. Like a baby in its mother's placenta, Jason struggled to endure the pain and focus. Trying to forget the physical pain, and concentrate on sensing the powerful artistic conception contained in the sword intention. But the severe pain was so terrible that whenever Jason tried to concentrate, the intense pain would break his spirit. He felt that the skin on his body seemed to be slowly melting under the pricks of thousands of needles, and the muscles were corroding bit by bit, although this was an illusion caused by intense pain. But it appeared clearly in Jason's mind. No, if this continues, not only will I not be able to comprehend the sword's meaning, but I will die from the pain. Jason cried silently in his heart. Although this sword intent cannot collapse his soul, the severe pain caused by the collision between the two will make Jason's consciousness unbearable. Once his consciousness dissipates, his body will lose protection and his soul will completely collapse. Endure, I endure. I must forget the pain. What is pain? It is a feeling. It is a consciousness. I want to cut off the pain and remove this feeling from my spirit. At this time, Jason he also showed his unprecedented endurance and perseverance. Bear the pain fiercely. People have joys and sorrows, and all kinds of spirits, but the heart can control all kinds of spirits. I use my heart to kill this pain and free the spirit. The dead don't know pain, but the living know pain. Suddenly, Jason, who was struggling to endure it, roared, and his originally curled-up body suddenly relaxed completely. His soul and spirit no longer tried to forget the pain, but instead searched for it. In the ocean of spirit, all kinds of wills were ups and downs, and suddenly a black light flashed through, and Jason seemed to have caught a trace of the painful spirit in his mind. Behead the pain! Jason roared fiercely, and the sea of spirit boiled. He instantly captured the trace of pain, and then killed it fiercely and eliminated it. Suddenly, Jason's body suddenly felt a sense of relief, and the pain was no longer so intense. Swoosh, swish, swish in the lake of sword intent, the endless lake water boiled, surrounding Jason and clinging to his skin. In the severe pain, Jason did not notice that a trace of the lake water turned into a stream of water. The airflow gradually penetrated into his skin, muscles, and bone marrow, slowly integrating with his body. Jason's body is like a sponge, slowly absorbing the water of the sword intention in the lake of sword intention. At this moment, traces of pain were being stabbed in the spiritual sea in Jason's mind. Gradually, Jason could no longer feel the pain in his soul. His soul was completely in contact with the sword intention. The sword is the first of 100 weapons, and the sword's intention also has many points. There are killing sword intent, destruction sword intent, wind sword intent, cloud sword intent, and even death sword intent, life sword intent, and reincarnation sword intent. Basically, everything in the world can be a sword intent, and among the sword intent there is usually no distinction between strength and weakness. With continuous understanding, the higher the realm, the stronger the power. But the vast majority of kendo masters usually only understand a certain kind of sword intent. Only after reaching the peak of a certain sword intent can they possibly understand other sword intents. A truly peak kendo master will usually master the sword intent. There are only 2 or 3 types, and no more than 5 or 6 types at most. If someone tries to comprehend more than 10 sword intentions at the same time, it will often lead to the failure to comprehend the sword intentions to the highest level. However, as soon as Jason's soul merged with the sword intention in the lake of sword intention, he was stunned. In his perception, the sword intention contained in the lake of sword intention could not be used at all. To express it in several ways, it is not even a dozen or hundreds of ways, but thousands of ways. Thousands of complicated sword intentions appeared in Jason's mind, and he couldn't help but marvel. This is a world of sword intent, vast and complex, like the stars in the sky, full of beauty and brilliance. Jason is deeply fascinated by it and is completely shocked by it. Who is this ancient sword god? He actually possesses so much sword intention. It's really Jason sighed in his heart while immersed in the vastness of the sword intention. Gradually, Jason completely let go of his body and mind and merged with the sword intention. Although at the beginning, Jason's understanding of the sword intention was very low, but as time passed bit by bit, there is also more and more understanding of this sword intention. Jason suddenly felt as if his body had become a part of the sword's will, and his understanding of the way of the sword had also improved by leaps and bounds. Wow! The lake of sword intent flowed gently. Jason continued to understand, and at the same time, the whole person continued to fall in the lake of sword intent. As Jason descended, the intensity of the sword became stronger and stronger, and waves of pain suddenly appeared in Jason's mind again. However, Jason's body was motionless, his eyes were closed, as if he was dead. His breathing was long, and although the expression on his face was painful, it was not intense. It seemed that he had alleviated the pain on his own. Jason has completely integrated into the perception of this sword's intention. Day after day passed, and in the blink of an eye, Jason had dived to 25 meters in the lake of sword intent, exceeding his previous diving depth. Jason's abnormal behavior also attracted the attention of the 40 people below. Michu drew the attention of Shura and others. In the past month, they had continuously resisted the sword intent and made a lot of progress. However, after seeing Jason's appearance, all of them had surprised looks on their faces. What? Why is this kid here again? Look at his appearance, what on earth is he doing? Why didn't he resist the sword's intention? Underneath, Shura and others were surprised. They were resisting the sword's intention. They were all in front of them. There is a light shield formed to prevent the approach of the lake of sword intent, but Jason is different from them. His body is completely in contact with the lake water, just like a fish in the lake, swimming in the lake water. Is he comprehending the meaning of the sword? Suddenly, Shura seemed to have thought of something and exclaimed, his eyes solemn and full of shock. With his understanding of swordsmanship, he naturally understood the purpose of Jason's move. Could it be that the assessment of this ancient sword god is not to ask us to resist the sword's intention, but to understand the sword's intention? It was like a flash of lightning flashed through everyone's minds, and there was a loud roar. As soon as this idea came out, their faces showed shock and anger. They were shocked that after spending a whole month of hard work, they actually took the wrong path. They were angry that Jason had already figured out the purpose of the ancient sword god and was far ahead of them. No, I can't let him comprehend it anymore, otherwise, I will not be able to inherit the sword god's inheritance at all. Shura said fiercely in his heart, his eyes rolled, and an evil thought emerged in his mind. Everyone, this boy understands the purpose of the ancient sword god. It is too abominable to practice alone. He is already far ahead of us. If he continues to understand, I am afraid that we, the group of people, will not be able to do it at all. If there is a chance to get the inheritance of the sword god, in my opinion, it is better to kill him first, and then we can fight for the inheritance of the sword god. Shura's words were spread in the lake of sword intention. As soon as the words came out, Bottoms, Caesar, Ian, Dewey, and others present looked at Jason almost at the same time. Jason naturally heard these words. He was immersed in the realization and suddenly came back to his senses. His expression changed involuntarily. Damn Shura, this is too vicious. He actually said this: attack this kid, make it impossible for him to comprehend the meaning of the sword. Kill him so that we can have a chance. Both Tams and Caesar looked at Jason indifferently without saying a word, but the white-haired old man Ian and the short-haired middle-aged man, both Yi and Shura, looked at each other, and at the same time quickly floated up towards Jason. Although this ancient sword god allowed everyone to accept the assessment, he did not say that fighting was prohibited during the assessment. Shura, Ian, and Dewey floated towards Jason at the same time and then took action. Boom! The divine power burned, and 3 terrifying attacks turned into a golden giant sword, a black long knife, and a yellow giant axe, all of which shrouded Jason, and the figure of Caesar was also shining in the lake of sword intent. Hidden in it, no one could don't know what his purpose is. No one can stop me from these bastards. Jason gritted his teeth in anger, his face became extremely ferocious, and at the same time, his body shook, and he turned his palm into a sword and slashed forward. Wow! A terrifying sword intent appeared in the lake and collided hard with the attacks of the 3 Shura people. Boom! An extremely terrifying sword intent appeared in the lake and rushed forward, colliding hard with the attacks released by the Shura trio. The huge lake of sword intent is surging. If it were in the past, Jason would have been very difficult to fight against Shura alone with his understanding of the sword. If the 3 Shura attacks at the same time, then he would simply die. But at this moment, after practicing in the lake of sword intent for so long, Jason's understanding of the way of swordsmanship and sword intention has reached an unparalleled height. As soon as the sword intention in his hand comes out, it merges with the sword intention in the surrounding lake of sword intent, forming a huge force that cannot be destroyed. Boom! The deafening roar echoed in the lake of sword intent. Looking from a distance, the lake was filled with waves. Jason turned his palm into a sword, and the 4 forces collided and dissipated with each other, but he was actually unscathed. Shura, Ian, Dewey, you are so shameless. Jason roared. Shameless, haha, what a big joke. This ancient sword god is the pinnacle of the ancient times. His inheritance naturally belongs to the virtuous. For the sake of his inheritance, even if he does anything, it will not be considered shameless. Shura, he spoke coldly. You, a guy who doesn't know where he came from, actually want to rob the treasures of our wild ancient land. It's just an idiot's dream. The white-haired old man Ian sneered. It's really ridiculous. The short-haired middle-aged man also said coldly, with cold eyes. Now this kid is walking in front of us, kill him, and the remaining 5 of us will be on the same level. Bottoms, Caesar, how about we take action together? Shura looked at Bottoms and invited. Humph, this is your own business and has nothing to do with me. Bottoms snorted coldly and immediately ignored Shura. After looking at Jason, he slowly floated up towards the water. As for Shiza, he has disappeared to no one knows where. This guy, Shura cursed angrily. Together with Ian and Dewey, they quickly approached Jason's location and attacked again at the same time. The last time the 3 Shura people used their divine power to attack from a distance, the power was not great, but this time, the 3 of them, 3 strong men at the peak of the moonlight god, came up to kill them, and each of them used their best to attack. A dazzling light burst out from the long sword. In this lake of sword intent, they did not dare to use their original weapons. Each one of them used the 7-color sword they had obtained before. 3 long swords of different colors, orange, green, and yellow, shined. Came in front of Jason. Damn it! Jason didn't dare to be careless. He also raised the purple sword in his hand and stopped him. Boom! A huge roar that was 10 times more terrifying than before spread across the world. Huge waves rolled over, and Jason was thrown heavily into the lake, creating a channel in the lake. The three Shura men paused for a moment, then flew over again, with ferocious expressions on their faces. Under their siege, Jason was unable to even fight back. Although I have gained a lot of understanding of sword intent, without using the spirit god technique and the god-destroying killing technique, my combat effectiveness is greatly weakened. Among the three of them, Shura alone is not weaker than me, plus Ian and Dewey. I can only resist in embarrassment. If I can use the spiritual god art, I still have the strength to fight, but the spiritual god art and the god-destroying killing art are too serious. If they see once word gets out, I may not be able to move even an inch in this world of gods. Jason was anxious, and the divine power surged in his body. He tried his best to dodge, but he was still being ravaged. He did not dare to use the spiritual god technique and the god-destroying killing technique. Once used, Jason would have no chance of survival in this wild ancient land under the command of the Dark God King. Although he is not weak now, he still faces those sun gods. Even the figures at the peak of the sun gods are simply not enough to watch, let alone the God King of Darkness who has ruled the world of gods for countless years. A strong man at the level of a God King might be able to fall with just one look. Jason's only advantage now is that he doesn't need to expend much energy to resist the invasion of sword intent after he has understood the sword intent. Although Shura and the others have reduced a lot of pressure by returning from more than 40 meters to more than 20 meters, they still have to resisting the sword intent from all around. It is precisely because of this that Jason was able to persist under the siege of 3 people and not be killed. This kid is still really stubborn, but I don't believe that the 3 of us can't kill this news. After being unable to kill Jason, Shura and the others were also angry. In an instant, their attacks suddenly became more fierce. He stood up, making Jason feel overwhelmed and unable to resist. Boom! Another terrifying attack struck, and Jason's body surged with divine power, sending him flying backwards. Hi! Suddenly, a green light appeared behind Jason. This light was extremely weak, but it surged to extremely strong in an instant. Like a green lightning, it suddenly appeared in the void and struck Jason. The back of the head. Fast too fast to be imagined. In the blink of an eye, the green light had already reached the back of Jason's head. It's Shiza. Not far away, the 3 Shura people who were rushing towards them at high speed were startled at first, and then surprise appeared on their faces. Caesar ignored them before and disappeared quietly. I thought he didn't want to join the crowd attacking Jason, but I didn't expect that he had already had an idea and hid it secretly just for this thunderous blow. When that terrible attack came, Jason's hair stood up all over his body, and he felt a hint of death threat deep in his heart. Damn it! He roared angrily. At this critical moment, he could no longer care about anything else, and the divine power in his body shook. God of War technique, possession by the God of War. Jason's body suddenly erupted with a terrifying force. The body that had been unable to avoid suddenly increased in speed and turned into a stream of light, quickly dodging to the side. But Caesar's speed was too fast. At the critical moment, Jason still could not completely dodge. The green long sword turned into a stream of light and brushed his arm, leaving a long wound on his arm, and blood spurting out from it. The terrifying sword intent in the lake suddenly seemed to have found an outlet to vent, swarming towards Jason's mind. Buzz! Jason's mind suddenly started to tremble, and his whole body was in a trance. What? He was actually dodged by this kid? What did he cast just now? Why did his speed suddenly increase so much? Shura and others not far away had shock on their faces. The next moment, the ferocious figure appeared again, and the man took action against Jason again without hesitation. Bang! Jason hurriedly intercepted, the purple sword in his hand shook violently, and he could hardly hold it. His confused mind made it difficult for him to effectively resist. Under the impact, his body quickly retreated towards the lake. Bottoms, stop him. The direction Jason was flying towards was exactly where Bottoms was. Shura and others flew up from a distance, and they all shouted loudly. "You can take care of your own affairs. I won't get involved." Bottoms was trying to understand the sword's intention on the lake. When he saw Jason flying towards him, he immediately stepped aside and shouted coldly at Shura and others. Voice. Bottoms guide, "Damn it, Shura," and the others said angrily. "What should I do?" Because he was close to the lake, Jason suddenly felt that the pain of the sword coming from the lake was much relieved, and he was thinking anxiously. Nowadays, it seems that it is impossible not to expose this situation. Just as Jason was thinking in his mind and retreating to the lake, Bottoms, who had been standing aside and seemed to have no hostility towards Jason, suddenly flashed a bright light in his eyes, and the red sword in his hand instantly melted. A stream of light pierced Jason's head. Tisk! The red long sword was like a meteor falling from the sky. It reached extremely fast speed and arrived at the center of Jason's eyebrows in the blink of an eye. Boom! Wherever the long sword passed, a terrifying force spread out, shrouding Jason's entire body. If Bottoms' sword hit hard, Jason's head would be destroyed in an instant. It was stabbed and exploded, turning into a pile of blood and mud. This Bottoms, Shura, and the others were stunned, and immediately their faces showed joy. They never expected that at this critical moment, they had not intervened and seemed to be extremely polite to Jason. Friendly Bottoms uses this trick. "Boy, don't blame me. If you want to blame me, blame you for being too far ahead of us. You must die so that I can have a chance to get the inheritance of the ancient sword god." Bottoms' extremely loyal expression suddenly became extremely loyal. Ferociously, he stabbed Jason mercilessly. If he were just an ordinary sun god peak powerhouse, Bottoms would never behave like this. However, after entering the sword god sword tomb, everything he saw made him understand that this ancient sword god was not a person at all. This terrifying lake of sword intention is an amazing thing that ordinary sun gods at the peak of their powers cannot possess. Even the ruler of this barbaric ancient land, barbarian god Lon, one of the 5 sun gods under the dark god king. This seems to have exceeded the limit that the sun god can possess. Hey! The red sword came to Jason in an instant, just as it was about to pierce Jason's eyebrows. Huh! A dazzling blue light suddenly bloomed from the center of Jason's eyebrows. The blue light quickly grew in size, and a tiny blue pagoda flew out from Jason's eyebrows, directly blocking the red sword. Buzz! An astonishing shock rippled across the lake. The red sword collided with the blue pagoda. Bottom's body shook violently, and his whole body was instantly thrown away. A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth. On the other hand, Jiajiasen, although the blue pagoda in front of him was tiny, it seemed to weigh more than 1,000 pounds, unscathed and unmoving. The blue pagoda quickly grew in size, and Jason's entire body turned into a stream of light and entered the bottom of the pagoda. What is this? Seeing this scene, everyone present was stunned. A yellow pagoda as tall as one person appeared in the lake of sword intent, floating quietly in the water, shocking everyone present. This is some kind of space artifact that can allow people to enter it? Space artifact, how could this kid have such a treasure? Shura and others were stunned, and Bottoms did not expect it. How could he fail even with such a secret attack? In the god realm, artifacts do not only have a single purpose of attack. In addition to weapon-type attack artifacts, there are also some defense-type artifacts, speed-type artifacts, space-type artifacts, and many other uses. Among these artifacts, space artifacts are often the rarest. Most people have never even heard of them, let alone seen them. Damn it, no matter where this kid got his space artifact, if we join forces together, we still don't believe we can't kill this kid. Shura rose into the sky and roared. As he got closer and closer to the lake of sword intent was attacking him. The pressure was getting smaller and smaller, and the orange sword in his hand suddenly burst out with a dazzling light. This light was more than 10 feet long, like a giant dragon, swiftly sweeping towards the blue pagoda. Attack! Kill this kid. Ian, Dui, and bottoms also shouted at the same time. They released the divine power in their bodies without hesitation and struck Jason hard with the long sword in their hands. Whoosh! The 5 dazzling sword lights contained vast murderous intent, like 5 immortal rainbows, penetrating the lake of sword intent and slashing at the blue pagoda. Boom! The blue pagoda that Jason drilled into shook violently, surging in the lake water, opening up a long channel. However, when the bright rainbow of light completely dissipated, the blue pagoda was unscathed. There was no trace on the tower that was directly hit. How could this happen? What level of artifact is this blue pagoda? The 5 of us can't leave any traces on it even if we work together? Shura and others all had dull expressions. With their strength, the 5 of us joined forces. The desperate attack must be treated with dignity even by the strong ones at the Sunyao god level, and the 7-color long swords they obtained in the Lake of Sword Intent have astonishing auras emanating from each handle, which far exceeds their own. The power is obviously the 7 swords that the ancient sword gods valued, otherwise they would not be used to protect the Lake of Sword Intent. Each sword is a high-grade artifact, much stronger than their own weapons. In addition, they are currently in the Lake of Sword Intent, and attacking with the 7-color long sword has the bonus of Sword Intent. If the blue pagoda was a mid-level artifact, it would have been shattered by this blow even if it was a ping-level artifact. It may not be unscathed, but the result made the 5 Shura people feel unbelievable, and there was a hint of something wrong in their hearts. I don't believe it, attack me, attack. After a brief shock, Shura's face showed a trace of ferocity again, his. Zhong shouted angrily and took action again with the orange sword in his hand. Boom! Infinite sword intent rose in the Lake of Sword Intent, and the sky and the earth seemed to change color at this moment. This time Shura used all his power, no longer suppressing it at all. Why don't you take action yet? If this kid gets the inheritance, we will all die. Shura roared as he took action in anger. Go! Attack! After hearing Shura's roar, Ian, Bottoms, and others did not hesitate at all. Their faces were ferocious, and vast power was released from their bodies, like it was the ancient giant beast that had unlocked its seal, and the aura that swept across the 9 heavens and 3 realms rose from his body. As strong men at the peak of the Moonlight Goddess, each of them had their own unique skills. They were originally supposed to be the last ones to take action when fighting for treasures, but unexpectedly, they were the first to use them. Boom! The sky collapsed and the earth shattered, mountains and rivers turned upside down, and waves surged into the sky above the Lake of Sword Intent, rolling up huge waves that soared into the sky. The terrifying murderous intention shot straight into the sky, penetrated the vast sky, and penetrated the universe. An astonishing big explosion resounded in the Lake of Sword Intent. The blue pagoda kept rolling in the surge of 5-color divine power, like a helpless boat looking for its way back on the sea during a storm. It was in danger of being destroyed at any time, but the long river of divine power continues to flow, but this small boat always stands on the waves and has never been destroyed. Attack, you attack, with your strength, even if you exhaust all your strength. You can't even think of leaving the slightest trace on the God of War Tower. In the suffocation of the God of War Tower, Jason activated the space in the God of War Tower, but his face, he showed an indifferent smile. As his strength increased, his understanding of the God of War Tower became stronger and stronger. When he first got the God of War Tower, he thought it was just an ordinary artifact, but Jason discovered that with his current strength and attainments, he could only activate a very small part of the formations in the God of War Tower. Only then did he finally understand that the power of the God of War Tower could not be fully demonstrated with his current strength. With his 4th grade formation at the peak of magic, he is about to enter the 5th level of formation strength, but he can only activate part of the formations of the God of War Tower. This God of War Tower is so powerful that Jason boasts that with the strength of Shura and the others, there is no way he can do anything to it. Damage, let alone the moonlight gods like them, even the sunlight gods may not be able to damage the God of War Tower. How is it possible that the five of us attack like this and can't damage the blue pagoda at all? And when Jason was quite leisurely watching Shura and the others attacking him in the God of War Tower, in the Lake of Sword and Tension, Shura and the others who were constantly attacking were all dumbfounded after they stopped attacking. The power of the space artifact possessed by Jason far exceeded their expectations. What should we do now? The five people were confused. This blue pagoda is too powerful. With the strength of the five of us, we cannot break it open at all, but this does not mean that it is indestructible. Shura looked around the crowd and said coldly. Of course we know this, but the key point is that with the strength of the five of us, we can't break through the God of War Tower now. Ian said with a cold expression and some anger. Actually, I have an idea. Suddenly, Shiza's ghost-like voice sounded faintly in everyone's ears. Everyone looked over. We table tennis players cannot break through this God of War Tower, but I think you all know how powerful this Lake of Sword and Tent is. In this Lake of Sword and Tent, this God of War Tower is actually a foreign object and is easily rejected. As long as we blast the God of War Tower into the depths of the Lake of Sword and Tent, I don't believe that the God of War Tower can withstand the bombardment of the ancient sword god's sword and tent. Nishizawa said indifferently. This is one way, but there is another possibility, that is, if we blast the God of War Tower into the depths of the Lake of Sword and Tent, but the Lake of Sword and Tent cannot cause damage to the God of War Tower, wouldn't we be helping instead? This kid? Ian frowned and said coldly. Everyone was startled, this was not impossible. Then do you have a better way? Caesar sneered, if you have a better way, just pretend I didn't say it. This Ian and others hesitated. I don't think such a situation will happen. Everything this ancient sword god did in the Lake of Sword and Tent obviously shows that if you want to get his inheritance, you must accept the assessment. If other methods are used, this ancient sword god, it's impossible to agree. Bottom said. Okay, let's do it. Finally, everyone made up their minds. Jason in the God of War Tower couldn't help but be stunned when he heard the plans of the people outside. Boom. The next moment, a huge force hit the God of War Tower. The blue pagoda surged with this force and rushed towards the bottom of the Lake of Sword and Tent. Boom. 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 A wave of power hit the God of War Tower one after another. After a while, it had dropped to a distance of 40 or 50 meters. At such a depth, the Lake of Sword and Tent, the Sword and Tent had reached an astonishing level, and the blue pagoda, transformed into the God of War Tower, seemed unable to withstand the power and began to tremble. As it descended, the God of War Tower trembled more and more, and it seemed that it might burst at any time. This method works. Shura and others showed joy on their faces, and then released their full blow. Bang! The God of War Tower quickly sank downwards, and finally disappeared into the Lake of Sword and Tensions and the post-sword intentions. This kid will never survive. Once he comes out, at that depth, he will be torn to pieces by the sword in an instant. Either he hides in this blue pagoda for the rest of his life, or he comes out to seek death. Shura and others had a trace of expression on their faces. The smiles that the plan was successful immediately flew towards the lake, and they also began to try to understand the sword intention in this Lake of Sword and Tension. In the process of flying upward, the 5 Shura people also kept a safe distance from each other. When they dealt with Jason before, they joined forces together, but now, they have become competitors with each other. What Shura and others did not see was that the God of War Tower where Jason was located suddenly stopped trembling after disappearing from their sight, without the slightest sign of collapse. In the space of the God of War Tower, Jason sat cross-legged, his brows furrowed slightly. The previous appearance of the God of War Tower about to collapse was just a disguise. Even the shaking of the God of War Tower and being knocked away were all disguised. If Jason was willing, he could completely keep the God of War Tower fixed there. Even at a depth of nearly 100 meters in the Lake of Sword and Tent, the sword and tent contained in the Lake of Sword and Tent, which could kill the Sunlight God, could not make the God of War Tower tremble. However, Jason's mind was not focused on this. Instead, he was worried that although he was safe in the God of War tower, he would not be able to accept the assessment at all. Once he got out, he would not be able to survive at such a depth with his own strength. Survive. It would be great if I could also accept the assessment in this God of War tower. Such an idea came to Jason's mind. As soon as this thought came out, boom. The entire space of the God of War tower suddenly shook, and the next moment, a terrifying sword intent penetrated the space of the God of War tower and spread to Jason. The essence of this sword intent is extremely terrifying, but after being weakened by the God of War tower, it has just reached the limit that Jason can bear. It neither makes him feel relaxed nor makes him unbearable. At the same time, Jason felt that his perception of the sword's intention had also improved a lot. This God of War tower actually has such an effect. Jason's face showed a look of ecstasy. Jason did not expect that he could still accept the assessment in the God of War tower, and with the help of the God of War tower, he could comprehend the sword intention in the lake of sword intent much faster than before. This was something Jason had never thought of before. In that case, let's seize the time. The sword intention in this lake of sword intent is too vast. It is not easy to fully comprehend it. It has already passed since I arrived in the God realm. After 2 full months, Lan Yugusin has less than 10 months left. If he cannot get the assessment of this ancient sword god during this period, it will be dangerous. Jason said silently in his heart, and immediately, his eyes became extremely firm, his eyes slowly closed, and he began to fully comprehend this vast sword intention. Boom! The terrifying sword intent surged through Jason's body like a tide, making him completely intoxicated. Hua on the surface of the lake of sword intention, the 5 Shura people also began to open their bodies. They no longer used their divine power to resist this terrifying sword intention. Instead, they tried to contact and understand this sword intention. 1 day of knowledge, 2 days, 1 month, 2 noon months, and when Jason and the others accepted the inheritance, battles were going on one after another in various places in the Sword God Sword Tomb, and many people entered the Sword God Sword Tomb. For their own benefit, each of the star gods in the tomb used all their strength to fight in a bloody battle. During this process, several Xingyao gods came to the deepest part of the sword tomb and saw the lake of sword intent. They were all shocked in their hearts, and when they saw the lake suspended in the sword intent above the lake, after Alexis, the white-haired old woman among the 4 moonlight gods, died and returned to the blue sword above the lake, some brave people tried to enter the sword's well with this long bait. In the lake. Unfortunately, the moment he entered the lake of sword intent, he was discovered by Shura and others who were meditating in the lake of sword intent, and then killed him directly. This lake of sword intention has now become a forbidden area for the 5 Shura people. If you don't reach the strength of Yuehui God, you will definitely be attacked by them if you want to enter. After 3 or 4 Xingyao gods died in succession, these Xingyao gods were angry one by one, but they were helpless. They could only look at the vast lake of bait, then gave up and left, continuing to fight with this sword. Looking for treasures that he can possess in the mountains. In this way, time passed bit by bit, and in the blink of an eye, half a year passed. Now, in this lake of sword intention, Shura, who has the strongest understanding of sword intention, has been able to dive into a depth of 100 meters, while Bottoms and others are also comprehending it at a depth of only 10 meters. As a strong man in swordsmanship, he is a Shura with sword intention. He can comprehend the sword intention in the lake of sword intention much faster than those strong men like Bottoms, although the 5 of them only have a short time. A distance of more than 10 meters, but the meanings represented are completely different. And as Shura's talent in swordsmanship became stronger and stronger, the eyes of the 4 Bottoms looking at Shura in the lake also became unkind. Shura naturally knows what Bottoms and others are thinking. When practicing, he is far away from everyone. If there is any movement, he will immediately wake up. However, when Shura dived 2 or 3 meters again, Bottoms and others, who were afraid that they would get further and further away, finally lost their patience and launched a fierce attack on Shura. Although Bottoms and the others could not reach the depths where Shura was, it did not mean that they could not attack. The four Bottoms continuously attacked Shura, disturbing his practice. Facing everyone's attacks, Shura could only roar again and again, and his speed of enlightenment immediately slowed down, and he was gradually caught up by Bottoms and others. Therefore, among the five Shura, Nishizawa, Bottoms, Ian, and Dui, whenever one of them comprehends quickly and makes more progress than others, he will be attacked by a group of people, slowly slowing down his comprehension speed. The cultivation speed of the five people has slowed down. Sometimes, even if they have fully comprehended this point of sword intention, they will continue to comprehend it instead of entering a deeper level. However, what the five Shura people did not expect was that just as they were restraining each other and slowly comprehending, in the deepest part of the lake of sword intent, nearly 300 meters away, there was a white circular light mask covering the bottom of the lake, exuding a soft glow. And above the light barrier, more than 200 meters away, a figure was sitting cross-legged in the water, eyes closed, motionless. This figure is none other than Jason. When Jason was blasted into the lake of sword intent by Shura and others over 100 meters deep, he continued to practice in the God of War Tower. It only took him 2 months to fully understand this, with the help of the God of War Tower. A deep sword intention. In the following time, Jason continued to practice, and the God of War Tower also continued to decline. As Jason's understanding of the sword intention became deeper and deeper, the speed of realization became faster and faster. In a short time, in just 8 months, Jason had reached the deepest part of the lake of sword intent and saw the white cover. However, this last level seemed to be particularly difficult, causing Jason's steps to stop here. In order to better understand the sword's intention, Jason put away the God of War Tower and let the water of the lake of sword's intention wrap around him, feeling the constant transmission. The terrifying sword intent coming over. Jason was sitting cross-legged in the lake above the light barrier. The lake water, containing the terrifying sword intent, was constantly flowing. It seemed calm, but the occasional hint of terrifying sword intent made people dare not be afraid at all. The heart of scorn. His whole body was suspended in the lake water, being bombarded by the sword intent continuously. Even his breathing seemed to have stopped, and his pulse was as slow as a turtle breathing. However, anyone who understands the laws of the Great Road will find that not only does his body not destroyed by this sword intention, the vitality in his body became more and more intense. Shocking breaths slowly emitted from his body. This was the result of the sword intention being highly integrated into his flesh and blood. The most horrifying thing is that his skin turned into a light jade color and looked so tough and dense that even if it was cut by a divine weapon, it would not break. At this time, Jason felt as if he was bathing in the spring breeze. His soul was completely integrated with the sword intention of the lake of sword intent. Gradually, everything in the lake of sword intent was clearly presented in his mind. Middle. At this time, the soul in his mind had condensed from its original liquid state into a bright long sword. The brilliant light continued to bloom from the sword body, as if it was going to break through the heavenly gate on the top of his head and shine directly at Nyodo, connected to the vast universe, exuding vast power. This is a symbol that the power of the soul has been condensed to the extreme and is about to transform. It is only waiting for the last moment to break out of the cocoon and become a butterfly, reaching a higher realm. Where the heart is, what the mind moves, with the sword as the body as a god, with the god as the mind, the man and the sword become one, the sword's mind is perfected. There was a splash of water, and Jason, who had been silent all this time, suddenly opened his eyes. Opening his eyes, huge vitality suddenly erupted, and an extremely terrifying force burst out from his body. Jason's body sank at the same time, hitting the white light shield hard. Boom! It was like hitting a soap bubble. The light barrier that Jason couldn't break through before was now easily broken through by him. At the moment he broke through, boom! The entire lake of sword intention fluctuated violently, and an astonishing breath rose into the sky, bursting out from the lake of sword intent and rushing into the sky. In an instant, all the powerful men in the entire sword tomb raised their heads in fear. The coercion that spread across the 9 heavens and 10 earths spread out. All the starry gods fell from the air one by one. They were lying on the ground, as if looking up. Shenlong's aunt felt trembling from the deepest part of his heart. At the end of their sight, where the lake of sword intent was, a colorful light pillar stood between heaven and earth, majestic and domineering, dominating the world. This as everyone was trembling, looking at the colorful beam of light in the distance, with fear in their hearts. As for them, the 5 Shura people who were struggling to comprehend in the lake of sword intent were even more horrified and couldn't help themselves. What's going on? What happened? The monster sword intent washed through their bodies. They were originally comprehending, but they were all seriously injured by this sword intent, and blood spurted out from the corners of their mouths. However, they were completely unaware, staring blankly at the bottom of the lake, with doubts and confusion on their faces. They didn't understand what was happening at the bottom of the lake at this moment. At the bottom of the lake, Jason's whole body entered the white light barrier. A vast amount of information rushed into his mind like a tide, giving his brain a splitting headache. At the same time, the water in the lake of sword intention seemed to be filled with the water absorbed by the sponge swarmed into Jason's body, and was continuously absorbed and disappeared. It's that kid finally, a large amount of the lake of sword intent disappeared, causing Jason's figure to appear at the bottom of the lake, appearing in front of Shura and others. That kid is not dead. Could it be that he has passed the test and obtained the inheritance of the ancient sword god? The faces of Shura and others suddenly turned pale, without a trace of blood, and their bodies were trembling. Buzz. At this moment, a vast force of great law fell from the sky and enveloped Jason. After nearly a year of hard training, enlightenment, and the help of infinite sword power, Jason finally broke through the bottleneck of the star god and transformed into the moon god. The infinite laws of the Great Avenue slid down one after another like a waterfall, and thousands of strands poured into Jason's body, causing the divine power in Jason's body to transform from the starlight divine power to the moonlight god, and the aura contained in his body also continued to flow. Climbing, breaking through obstacles one after another. Boom. I don't know how long it took, but the endless laws of the Great Avenue dispersed. Jason's closed eyes suddenly opened, and 2 groups of fine light burst out from them. The fine light flashed, and it actually split the void. 2 gaps. This ancient sword god is incredible. It turns out to be like this. After carefully sensing the large amount of information that emerged in his mind, Jason remained silent for a long time and let out a long sigh,